Welcome to another 3Design Care training video. Today we're going to be looking at some Tiffany style or Tiffany inspired settings. I get this question all the time and it seems like a simple concept but not always the easiest to figure out. So I want to show you 3 different ways. So this first video we're going to take a look at style 1. It's the easiest of those. We're going to just do it completely in 3Design. So let's just jump right into it. We're going to start with our ring size builder like we usually do for rings. And I'm going to use a US size 7, and we'll leave the top plane at the default for now. We'll move it once we know where we're going to put our stone. So validate that. And then I do have an image. I'll share this image with the video if you want to use the same one just to kind of practice with. But I'm going to load an image and plane, last tool down here, and my first Tiffany style ring looks like so. And we'll just have to kind of scale this to match our ring size. We're just looking at the overall design from this, so it doesn't have to be exact, but just kind of adjust the scale and move it around until it fits. And then we're going to go ahead and right click that image and freeze it so that it is protected. We don't accidentally click on it. And then we can go back into our ring size builder and move that up to where we want our stone to sit and validate that. And then we will select the ring size builder again and switch over to the jeweler's bench and create our stone. So this first one, I'm going to go under carat weight for just a brilliant diamond here. And the first one is this one is about a 1.5 carat based on image. So we just type that in and validate. That looks about right. So obviously you can make this to any size stone, but this is what we're going to start with for this practice. Okay, so now we want to make it as parametric as possible. You'll have to make some adjustments as you change the finger size and the stone size to get everything to fit together. And you can always do that because we have a full parametric history of it. But we want to also have a lot of things update automatically whenever possible, so we don't have to go in and fix every curve and move every point and stone around. So we're going to link that to the stone size. And to do that, we need to create a plane. But before we can create a plane, I want that plane linked to the stone size. And the only really way to do that would be to get a curve based on that stone. And the easiest way to do that is if we right click, we see some example tools we can use, and one of those of course being extrusion. You've probably seen this trick in other videos. And we can extrude a bit of that stone shape, that round shape of it, like so. And we'll go ahead and validate that. We don't care, what size extrusion it is. We just want to get that solid shape out of there, so we can select it. And over in the curve section, we can extract the curve. And I'm just going to use that top edge since it's visible. That gives us the shape and size of our stone in a curve form. And then you can delete that extrusion. So you just have to do that temporarily to get that solid. So we can extract that curve. So that gives us a curve we can now base our plane on. So way down in the bottom again, plane from a curve. That will link a plane to the curve, which you can move around the curve and adjust its orientation. If you come over here under position, we're going to do 0.25, just because I like to have it in the flat front view here. You may have to adjust your orientation depending on the curve, how it extracted, which direction it extracted from. So you can just rotate it here 180, or you can do it manually here. But looks like this time it came in exactly the right orientation, so we'll leave that. And then we'll scale out, and I like to shrink this down a bit so I know that's my custom plane I'm working in and not one of the default planes. And then we will select that plane and go to a new sketch. So click on the sketch tool here, or the sketch module. And the first thing we're going to do is design the shape of our little claws here. And we're going to do that with just a regular NURBS curve. And we'll start on the inside, and I'm going to bring this up a little higher than the finished piece. You want to leave a little extra for setting. So I'm just going to bring that up a little bit and just kind of trace this out. Come down towards the middle, try to come right in the middle so they just barely cross. And then bring it down below the finger hole just a little bit. We'll trim that off even. And we'll do the same thing for the outside. I'm going to snap by hovering for a few seconds for that track line so I can snap the outside top point there as well, and then kind of design the outside of our shape. And then for our cross section, our profile here, we're going to use a polygon. And we're just going to draw a little hexagon, which is the default 5 sides. And I'm going to make sure that that is rotated at 0, so it's perfectly straight up and down. And then we want to squish this. If we look at our design, it's kind of a bit of a squashed hexagon or a chevron shape. So we're going to then scale it. Now, if we want to scale it and squish it, if we turn off the proportional, because this is a parametric curve at this point, it's designed using parameters and not just a NURBS or a spline, it'll warn us that we can't do this kind of transformation. So go ahead and cancel that. And before we try to squish it, we're going to use the little bomb here and explode the curve. So now it's in 5 segments, and then we'll do an auto connect to put it back together. That will transform it for us into just a simple spline. So let me undo that. And now that it's a simple spline, we can put our scale on there, turn off the proportional, and squish it. And I want it to be about 1 millimeter wide. So type that in there and validate that. And then the other thing I want to do is our chevron is, if we take these 2 corner points, that did not squish very even. What's happening? Let me move it and then squish it. Maybe it's just my eyes deceiving me here. Let's use a move tool on just those 2 corners here, because we want to push those up so that the outside of our claw shape is the flatter part. So that's the shape of it. Now we can squish it. The reason we want to squish it is because we're just doing a 2-rail sweep, so the width will be determined by how wide we make, I've got another point selected in there, by how wide we make our little shape here. So turn off the proportional and squish it down to about 1 millimeter. Or we can just type that in. That seems really thin. Let's go a little wider for this one, right about there. We can always adjust it. That looks correct. Now we can exit out of the sketch module using the exit button, and we're just ready to sweep. So select the 2 paths with control, and then curve sweeping. In the second tab, we'll add the first hand for this section, and then it places at the start points, which is just fine. I am using auto orientation and rebuild, so the curves match, and there's plenty of sections in the first tab, so leave that on. Precise won't make much of a difference in this one, so we'll leave that off. And in the third tab, I see we just need to rotate it. My flat end is to the side, so let's try 90. That's on the inside, so it's got to be 270. So you just pick the one that looks correct and validate that. Okay, so go ahead and save my project. If you haven't done so yet, it's a good habit to do that early. So Tiffany. Okay, so now we're ready to trim this to match our finger shape. So we're gonna select the metal first and then the finger size. And then over in the special effects, we're gonna do a crop and punch. And just validate that since we're cropping the inside of the circle. Now the bottom matches our finger size. And then we'll save that. Do a fillet. So special effects again, this time fillet. We're gonna just select all the edges, and I like to do a 1/4 millimeter, so 0.25. And that looks good, a little softer. And we're now ready to repeat it. So we're gonna select the first one, and we're gonna go over to construct, duplicate, circular duplication. Okay, and this is where you can choose how many prongs. I think the image showed 4. I think for a big stone like this, we'll do 6. And of course you can adjust your starting angle if you don't want them to be even. I think because of the way this simple band is in this design, it's easier if we leave it at 0 for this starting angle with a full 360 swept angle. So pretty simple duplication. Validate that. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the setting. We do want to make sure it's going to Boolean together, so I'm going to save again and do our Boolean under special effects, Boolean operation. And we're just going to do the entire circular duplication with the add operation. So validate that. Should Boolean pretty cleanly. You may have to adjust the curves and check your overlaps. If it's crisscrossing too much, you might have a Boolean issue there. Don't forget, you can always check it with polygon conversion. Preview that with your normal output settings for STLs. I do 003 millimeters, 0.003 with fine precision. We'll just preview that real quick. And of course, yeah, it looks good. No red lines. It should convert no problem. Okay, so from there, I'm going to go ahead and hide some of the stuff we're not using. So remember, spacebar is the shortcut for hide, show, and freeze. So I'm just going to highlight what I don't want to see anymore. Hide that. Hide that. We can go over to the tree and hide this entire sketch for now. And then we need to draw out our shank shape. So we're just going to do a simple shank like they have in the picture here, but you can design any shank you want from any of the other videos you've seen or any other techniques you've learned for creating your shanks. But I'll show you how I would do this simple one. So we're going to select the OXZ plane, the front view, and do a new sketch. And then we're going to use a symmetrical vertical curve plane and keep it closed. And we're just going to kind of trace out about 7-8 points, trace out the outside of our shape here, and then we can clean it up. Just make these points evenly spaced. You should get a nice round, clean shank. Something like that. Okay, and then while we're in here, we can go ahead and create our cross sections as well. So this is not quite a half round, it's kind of a chiseled half round, so a bit of a triangular shape like that. And then we need a skinnier one because this band kind of tapers down into the settings. So we're going to select that, use the move tool, move that down here a little bit, and click the keep original to make a copy. That way we can take the second copy and scale with the proportion off and squish it down. And it's going to be about as wide as our claws are. We can adjust that later as well, or you can type in the exact amount you want. If you want to make a specific thickness, it should be thinner at that end. Something like that. Okay, so now we're going to exit the sketch. Now before we can sweep this, there's a couple things we need to do. First of all, this isn't going to be a full sweep. We're going to do a partial sweep, but we want to link these two curves together so that they are parametric. If we change the finger size, the outline, outside rail that we drew will also update with it. So first thing we're going to do is select this ring size builder, that outline we just drew, and over in the jeweler's bench, we're going to use the ring outline tool to link them together. And so we've already pre-selected ring size builder is what we're linking it to. The curve is the outline. And we already drew this kind of precise to the ring's shape. So we can just stretch these back to match our drawing or our image. Okay. So now that we've done that, we can hide curve 1 here so we don't get those confused. The new one is the outline. And while I'm up here, I do see there's a little warning in the tree. It looks like geometry has been slightly moved to avoid failure. We already checked the preview of that, so we know it's fine. Usually when you see that warning, that just means to avoid a Boolean failure, they moved some surfaces around a little bit because there's a lot of crisscrossing in here. They did a good job of it, and it was clean. We can ignore that. But definitely be on the lookout for those errors. They can give us clues when things are going wrong. So back to where we were. We've adjusted this. I got a little too high up here. Okay, now we need to make these into partial curves so that we can do our partial sweep. So the first one I'm going to do is the ring size builder. We're going to actually just trim this to get rid of that middle section. So for that first one, we're going to go down to the curve section here in the solid module. Modify curves. There's a bunch of modifications to do. We're just going to use the third tab here, which is trim. Okay, and then I'm just going to zoom in, make sure I'm flat, looking straight at it. We want this to end right about there, based on my metal here, not really the image. Depends on how precise the image is at this point. And we just want to make this flat and even as possible. Okay, and then we're keeping the red side, so mine's opposite. We're going to hit other side. That'll get rid of this section here. Validate that. And a nice trick for you is both curves are still showing here. We want to, again, not mix up our curves. If we just hit the space bar while it's still selected, that'll hide the old one, and you should see your new cut or trimmed curve underneath it. So we're just going to repeat that for the outline as well. So we're going to do another modify curves, trim. We're going to turn on the trim, and we're going to go ahead and move this to this edge. Now, you'll notice that there is snapping to the start point of the curve. If this is getting in the way, we may want to go back into that modify curve and move this point. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, I'm sorry, we can do that. We'll have to do it as a separate one. You can do it in the same tool. You'll notice that with modify curves, you can add any of the modifications at the same time, but we want to move it first. So we're going to go to the direction tab and do change origin, which is going to allow me to move it down here. I like to move it to the bottom where that seam would be normally on a ring size builder as well. Okay, and then I'm going to hide the old version again, and we'll add another modify for the trim. That way, when we hit our little trim, that start point is out of the way. You won't have that snapping. So you don't have to do that, only if it's in the way. Mine just happened to be because I started that curve right about there, so it got in the way. But that's how you can fix that. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to line these up as evenly as possible. It's pretty straight. Happy with that. And again, other side if needed. Red side is the side we're keeping. Validate that. Again, the old curve is still highlighted. Just hit spacebar to hide it. And there's the new trimmed curve. So in the tree, you should see some modified curves. There's the one where I moved the start point, and then the new version. If you want, you can delete the old ones, the ones you're not using. So these are the two new trimmed ones. You can even label those if you want. You can't delete the sketch curve because it's based on that. If you try to delete that, it'll won't even give you the option because it's being used in the history. Okay, so now we've got our partial shank design here. It's still parametric because they're based on that outline curve we drew that we linked to the finger size. We'll test that out in a moment. So ready to sweep. I'm going to go ahead and save again. It's been a minute. And we're going to go up here to curve sweeping. And paths are, I only selected one. Let's try that again. Select both paths, the control key, curve sweeping. Okay, so everything on the first tab is filled in and ready. And we're going to add our first section. And that happens to be 0, which is right where I want it. That's the smaller shape. We're going to add another one with the smaller shape, this time on the opposite side. And then we're going to add the bigger shape. And right about here where we want that transition to happen. And again, we want it symmetrical, so we'll do the same thing for the fourth shape right there. If your curves aren't even, they should be if you set it up this way with your start points and everything aligned. That's okay. If it's off a little bit, go ahead and sweep the whole thing. Remember, you just cut it in half and mirror it back over if it's uneven. Or you can fix the curves and adjust it. But I'll do that a lot. If I find that one half of my ring looks good, just cut off the bad half and you can just mirror it over and boolean it back together. But this is looking pretty even, so we should be good there. Okay, so let me check my orientation. Yep, my curve is turned a little bit. It usually will be on a 2-rail sweep like this. So we're going to try 90, and there we go. That's where we have the top wider. I think that looks right. Yeah. 270 would be inside. Yeah, so that would be a 90 this time. Go ahead and validate that, and we should see our little pinch there. So now that I've done that, we can see it's a little wider than I want it to be. Let's go ahead and adjust this some more. So we're going to just narrow it out. We can use the scale tool, or I'm just going to do it manually until it starts to fit together a little better. We can also go in and widen our setting as well if it's too thin. We don't want this to get too thin in that area. So just bring that in just a little more. There we go. I'm happy with that. Okay. So I recommend keeping these two pieces separate. If you want to cast them as a single whole piece, just do your Boolean after you've made any adjustments and right before you export it. That way you can do any updating and change things. We're going to do some testing on this here in a second. So for one thing, I might need to adjust my trimmed curves to modify curves if I want this to come together a little better. It's a little off. So we can make those little adjustments as needed. And same thing for the top. Now, if you want this to be Boolean together as a whole piece, you're not going to cast them as two separate pieces. Instead of leaving the little gap here where you'll weld it later, go ahead and bring these curves inside the shank or the setting a little bit so that you can do a solid Boolean together. So like I said, we're leaving them separate for now. It's up to you. And we're going to then do our testing. So I'm going to do a save. And the first thing we're going to do is find our ring size builder. It should be the top of your sketch section if you have it organized that way. Double click there, and we're going to do a size, let's do 11, see how it updates. And recompute. Okay, so the ring size changed, everything looks good. Now, of course, the setting doesn't fit anymore. And that's because we trimmed it based on the smaller ring size. So we'll just go back in and adjust our curves again, our trim, to fit back in there, Boolean if needed, and then export that size. If we want to change the stone size, we can do so as well. Let's go up to a 2 carat instead of 1 carat. And the same thing, this won't match exactly once we start doing these variables in here. Actually, the 2 fits almost better. We just have to fix the outline curve. So those are really the only two things we have to adjust is the trim of our sweep here and their finger size and the stone itself to make those different changes. So very basic ring, but very popular. As you know, Tiffany style rings are very common. So this is one way to do that. Stay tuned for the second video. I'll show you another way to make a more blended look for your